I'm Mark Halperin.
And I'm John Heilemann. And with all due respect to Marco Rubio, what's in your wallet? With the Vikings, all that stuff. Happy National King Tut Day, sports fans.
Funky Todd.
In our lineup tonight, Republican peacekeeper Ben Ginsberg and Democratic warrior James Carville. But first, the biggest new bullseye of the 2016 race. That would be Marco Rubio. The darts are flying from the press and rival campaigns. And today, Rubio used an interview on Good Morning America to dismiss a new report in the Tampa Bay Times about his use of a state party, some kind of card, for personal expenses.
Jeb Bush also in his campaign putting out the idea that you're a risky bet. And the raising questions that has come up in your past campaigns about using the Republican Party credit card down in Florida for personal use.
People need to understand what they're talking about here. It wasn't a credit card. It was an American Express charge card secured under my personal credit in conjunction with the party. I would go through the bills would be mailed to me at home. Every month I would go through it. If there was a personal expense, I paid it. If it was a party expense, the party paid it. Now, I've recognized in hindsight I would do it different to avoid all this confusion. But the Republican Party never paid a single expense of mine, personal expense.
In that interview and in another one on Fox, Rubio laughed off Donald Trump's attacks on his personal finances and threw a dart of his own.
I mean, he is a disaster with his credit cards. You know, he certainly lives above his means. There's no question about that.
Well, I'm sorry.
You get a kick out of Donald Trump. But he was raising an important issue. You know, this came up at the debate last week. You had to draw down on your retirement account to pay living expenses. Does that show?
No, I didn't. That's not accurate. I wanted to make sure we had cash on hand for all kinds of things that come up. For example, you know,
that is living expenses.
Well, but obviously it's not day-to-day living expenses. It's things like, for example, if your refrigerator breaks.
Trump is trying to portray himself as a good businessman, and yet he has not really been pushed on this issue of the bankruptcies that his companies. He's like, that's the way everybody does it.
He explains it, as you said, by talking about, you know, how he used the bankruptcy code to help his company succeed. Sure, because I mean, ultimately, well, I think that's important for voters to continue to focus in on, you know, and I hope he'll continue to be asked about it because it's legitimate.
All right, Mark. So I turn to you now to provide a detailed taxonomy of the various Rubio tactics that he's employing to fend off these lines of attack.
He's good. First of all, he never got rattled, always smiling. Up in New Hampshire today, facing more questions about this. Our colleague Sally Kapoor says still very smooth and slick. Pushing back on Trump. Very unusual for Rubio to say another candidate should be scrutinized on a personal issue of Trump's bankruptcy. But he's in deflecting. He's saying these are old attacks. He's saying they're Democratic attacks. He's saying that there's nothing new here. You know, the fact is, he wasn't completely straightforward here. He said the state party never paid for personal stuff. They did. He reimbursed. Yeah. He said a refrigerator wasn't a personal expense. Yeah. It is.
A little ropey.
But if there are no new facts, he's got a lot of tactics.
Look, I'm impressed at his ability to smile while Donald Trump on screen calls him a complete loser. That takes some kind of composure. The refrigerator thing, a little bogus. The credit card versus a charge card thing, I don't think a lot of voters are going to buy that difference. The other thing, you hear an echo of Hillary Clinton here. Well, you know, I did it for convenience. If I had to do over again, I'd go back and do it a different way. She gets hammered by Republicans for that. He's going to get hammered, I think, by his fellow Republicans and others potentially for this.
He's got very smart aides, and some people are asking the question, why did they wait to put these additional records that are coming out? Maybe there'll be nothing in them, and it'll be a great little bit of political theater to say, oh, here are these records you were clamoring for, nothing there. I will say, to be honest to our viewers, what Rubio's opponents think is that there's more here than just sloppy bookkeeping.
Tip of the iceberg.
It's tip of the iceberg, and they're hoping that this not only rattles him, but leads to new areas. I got to tell you again, I've seen a lot of candidates under pressure so far. Yep. Rubio is flawless in tone, but he's doing it in short interviews. Let's see if he can do it in an extended way.
These are tried and true tactics. He's executing them reasonably well. But the question is, what's there? Florida politics is a swamp of corruption. People have gone to jail who've done the job that he did for misusing party funds. There are people in that Republican Party who've gotten in a lot of trouble. I'm not saying he will, but there's smoke, and a lot of people are now trying to figure out the extent of the fire, if there is one.
All right, but wait, there's more. It's not just the personal stuff about his finances. Since Rubio's Boffo debate performance in Boulder, he's also been forced to start defending some of his policies, none more so than his previous positions on immigration. Up in New Hampshire today, Donald Trump, for the second straight day, brought up newly minted Rubio fundraiser, Paul Singer.
Paul Singer represents amnesty, and he represents illegal immigration pouring into the country, and now he's with Rubio. Rubio was totally in favor of very, very lax rules. He was a member of the Gang of Eight. The Gang of Eight means come on in, folks. Come on in. Come on into the country. Nobody's going to stop you.
In that Fox News interview this morning, Rubio said the country is not going to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire, he said he'd end the executive program that shields dreamers from deportation. John, is policy going to be a problem as Rubio gets more scrutiny as much as the finance stuff?
Well, he's going to have to be very, very good at talking about a lot of things because of his youth and inexperience. He's got to be strong on policy. This immigration thing is a nightmare for him because he's now in a position of having been foursquare on one side, liberalization broadly speaking, and now a restrictionist. It's hard to square those two in a way that works in both the primary and potentially the general.
And it's hard to say I was part of the Gang of Eight fighting fiercely for comprehensive immigration reform and now just say I give up, it can't be done.
I couldn't get it done, and so now it can't be done.
That's going to be hard, but I will.
And I'm taking a more conservative position on it now.
But his past positions in Florida, his positions in Congress, and his positions of new stuff that comes up again, I know Marco Rubio thinks he's been through tons of scrutiny.
Nothing like it.
He's about to get a lot more scrutiny. And this Dreamer thing, again, did he plan that or did he just spit it out on the fly?
I have no.
The Bush allies are watching what's happening in the last 24 hours and saying it's all starting. The scrutiny is starting, and while Rubio might not be looking bad on camera, he's opening up a lot of problems down the road.
Look, Paul Singer made an argument. His argument, and it's an argument that everybody in the establishment who likes Marco Rubio is making. He's the only one who can navigate the primary and then win a general election. You start saying stuff like this about the Dreamers, you start running away from your immigration position to try to avoid Donald Trump, you get yourself pretty quickly in a position where you can't win the general election.
Here's a great thing for Trump, which we're seeing now with this Paul Singer thing. He did a little bit with Jeb Bush, which is he doesn't have any fat cat donors. So his opposition research folks can cherry pick anyone who's given any money to Rubio and say, Marco Rubio, Paul Singer's done X, Y, and Z. Yesterday, he wouldn't say why he thought Paul Singer was going to explode in Rubio's face. Today, I believe, was the beginning of his making Paul Singer the poster child to attack Marco Rubio.
And there are a lot of liberal positions that Paul Singer's for, including gay marriage and others.
Correct.
All right. John Ellis, Jeb Can Fix It, Bush is in New Hampshire today on his Jeb Can Fix It tour, riding his Jeb Can Fix It bus. One thing he's trying to fix is his debating skills ahead of the Fox business debate in Milwaukee next week. In a live-streamed interview with ABC's John Carl, here's what he said about the advice that he's been getting.
You've hired this media consultant to help you with debates?
Yeah, I've had one meeting with the guy. I'm going to be better.
What's he telling you?
He's telling me to be me. He's telling me to own what I believe.
But you need a consultant to tell you that?
Yeah, it's amazing, huh? Probably not. Probably not. My problem in the debates, I have to untrain myself to answer questions that are asked.
So you
actually,
think you should ignore the questions? Is that the?
You have to pivot towards what you want to say, and look at and learn to interrupt in a way that doesn't sound like you're just oppressively rude. You gotta garner the space. You gotta talk about what's important, and I'll do that. Whether I have a consultant or not is not as relevant right now.
Mark, so Jeb Bush has brought in a media consultant, a debate prep guy, famous, mysterious, known throughout the party, to give him advice, to tell him he needs to be himself. Has Jeb Bush finally, at long last, hit rock bottom?
Between that answer and the Drudge report basically suggesting Jeb Bush was like declining into oblivion, I believe Jeb Bush can come back. I really do, because of the nature of the field. But his performance is just uneven. He did a call with donors this afternoon, and he said, you nervous Nellies, calm down. I'm going to be good in the debate. Stop reading the clips. On his great moments now, he's great. He's having a great couple days. But the problem is now he doesn't really have that much of a margin of error. He's got to make his sound bites of the day good sound bites, and that was cringeworthy.
And I think, look, he said the thing on the donor call. He said this thing about how he was walking across hot coals. The other day he was eating nails before breakfast. I mean, look, that's an abomination. Saying that.
Stop
that
talking
is
about strategy.
This is the kind of thing, stop talking about strategy, but also stop saying I need someone else to tell me to be myself and laughing about it. That's the kind of thing that looks like indiscriminate flailing, desperation. It is not a good look for a candidate. Never.
Yeah.
I mean, even when you are desperate, if you look desperate like you're flailing, you go on the negative reinforcement thing, you're sliding down the
But again,
slope.
the thing's so out of it. If Jeb Bush has a great debate and Marco Rubio makes a gaffe in the debate, the thing reverses right back around.
But this is the thing we've talked about. I continue to maintain that it's not that he can't save his campaign in theory. It's just that these months of watching his performance skills go from bad to worse just suggests there's no reason to think that he will suddenly emerge as a new person, as a new Jeb. Why would one believe that on the basis of what he's done in the last 9 months?
He has flashes of intensity. And again, just to be clear, from Monday in Florida to South Carolina, now in New Hampshire, he's having a lot of good moments. And it seems like his head's in a better place. But that is not the kind of soundbite you want to leave behind. All right, coming up, we unravel the mystery of Ben Carson's general election strength and the famed Republican lawyer at the center of the fight over the debate about debates. The Honorable Ben Ginsberg joins us. We're back in just 60 seconds.
Polls. We've got them in a new WBUR survey from New Hampshire today. Donald Trump and Ben Carson are predictably at the very top. But look at the next tier. All four establishment lane candidates, Rubio, Kasich, Bush, and Christie, are bunched up between 7 and 9%. So, Mark, that's kind of a new wrinkle. And my question for you is, what does that tell us about where things are headed in the race in the Granite State?
First of all, if Trump's really at that level, yeah, the 3, 4, 5, and 6 are bunched up. But the fact is, 6 is not that far from 1. Right. You know, making up 10 points in the context of a crazy wide-open primary is not that big a deal. It does lead us, though, to the Rubio scenario that we talked about. To me right now, if you don't think Trump or Carson's going to be the nominee, which some people don't, the biggest fight is who's the top establishment finisher in Iowa. Because the top establishment finisher in Iowa, from that jumble of 4, should get a boost and could win New Hampshire.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we've seen Rubio's gained a little bit of altitude in all the polls, as people predicted. I did. Others did after coming out of this debate. But he's not broken away from the rest of those establishment figures. You know, John Kasich, I guess, because of the money he's spending and the time he's invested in New Hampshire, still right there with Rubio. Yeah. They're all within the margin of error of each other. They're all basically tied for second. You got 2 guys tied for first and 4 guys tied for second.
Yeah. You know, there was volatility, obviously, 4 years ago, where you saw Bachman, Kane, Gingrich all leading. Rubio, Cruz getting bumps nationally and in the states where they're doing well. They're not vaulting over Cruz. No. They're not vaulting over Carson and Trump. And I will say again, the establishment candidates, partly they're splitting the establishment vote, but partly is Rubio's one debate performance, Kasich's ads and time in New Hampshire, Christie's strong performance over a lot of time meetings. None of them are really busting out.
Right. The other thing that's interesting is that the New Hampshire poll basically mirrors the poll we're going to talk about in a second, which is the Quinnipiac national poll, with the exception of Kasich and Cruz are the only difference. Everybody else is basically in the same place.
That's right.
And usually we've seen more variance, both with the Iowa polls and the New Hampshire polls. The national polls are often at variance. Right now, there's a lot of weird consistency between the national numbers, the New Hampshire numbers, and the Iowa numbers. It's striking to me, not like any cycle I think I've ever covered before.
And of course, Carson has neither time on the ground in New Hampshire very much, nor natural constituency there, and yet he's mirroring in New Hampshire what he's doing nationally. All right, polls are kind of like slices of pizza. You cannot have too many. So here's another one. This one from Quinnipiac, and it's of the national variety. It also shows Carson and Trump essentially tied for first, with Rubio in third. But maybe the most interesting bits here are the head-to-head general election matchups amongst a general election electorate. In a face-off with Hillary Clinton, Carson is ahead 50-40. 50-40 over Hillary Clinton. That's the largest lead any of the Republican candidates have had in this survey. John, other surveys nationally lately have shown Carson the strongest against Clinton. What is up with that?
Well, look, I think that if there's the extent that Ben Carson has support that's durable, a lot of it is based on perceptions of his character, or maybe his actual character. People think of him as a modest guy, a humble guy, a guy with great accomplishment, a soft-spoken guy, not your average politician. Hillary Clinton, to many people, seems like none of those things. And the character contrast, I think, is what's going on here. Now, again, I'm not vouching for Carson's character, but I think that is what's fueling his appeal, because he's not a policy candidate, right? He's a character candidate, and the character contrast, I think, is working for him in this poll.
I'm amazed at how few people who aren't working for Ben Carson at the elite Republican level think he can be the nominee.
Right.
And I'm not sure that his head-to-head strength will sustain.
Neither will I.
I can't fully explain it, but I can say that people better stop thinking that the guy can't be the nominee. I don't know how many people, the 50% who pick him, I don't know how many of them even know who Ben Carson is. Maybe they just like his name.
Right.
But a lot do know him.
Yeah.
And that kind of general election strength undermines the argument many of the arguments that his detractors are making that he simply couldn't be a plausible general election candidate or a plausible president.
I think one of the things that's also true is that he has not been vetted really very fully, partly because of this elite tendency to write him off.
That's right.
So, like, most people don't associate Carson, even now, with the things that a lot of his supporters do, saying that America is kind of like Nazi Germany under Obama, saying that Obamacare is the worst things in slavery. A lot of people don't even associate. A lot of the people who support him think, oh, that's that really successful doctor, that nice African-American man who's a very successful doctor with a great biography, up from nothing to the top of his field. That's all they know. The press, I think, is failing in terms of just telling the story of Ben Carson in full.
Right. The Democrats would tell you that all plausible Republican nominees are equally conservative. The fact is, they're not.
They're not.
And some of the establishment candidates, Christie, Bush, Kasich, even Rubio on some issues, have more moderate positions on a few things.
Well, and temperamentally, they would never have said some of the things Ben Carson has said about Barack Obama.
It's not just outsider, insider, establishment, anti-establishment. It's more moderate positions and therefore potentially at least more electable. And it's also political skill. Carson is going to be tested just as Rubio is being tested now, but he seems to float above it even more than Rubio.
Right. It's those things you just said and the level of inflammatoriness of the rhetoric. And to me, if I were just a Republican voter, if I went back and heard some of the things he said, those things are not disqualifying, but when they become public and well known, really problematic in a general election. All right. The vote tallies are in from yesterday's off year election. So here's a quick off recap of the highlights. An Ohio ballot measure to legalize marijuana failed. A Houston ordinance that prohibited discrimination against gay, lesbian, and transgender people failed. And potentially the most consequential for 2016, the governor's race in Kentucky was won by self-funded Republican businessman Matt Bevin, who won an upset victory over Kentucky's Democratic Attorney General Jack Conway. Some say that race could foreshadow anti-government, anti-establishment, anti-Obama sentiments in the presidential race. Others say there was an election yesterday? Really? So, Mark, my question for you is, should Democrats be worried about any of those races in specific, all those races together, or should they just write it off and move on?
Well, they should realize that reports of the demise of the Republican Party are overstated. They control the House, they control the Senate, they dominate the governorships, they dominate the state legislators. Kentucky has been a place where Democrats have largely held the governor's mansion
for decades.
And now they've lost this one, and they lost it not based on, outside factors. They lost it based on one guy who was tied to President Obama and the Affordable Care Act, and one guy ran as a very conservative Tea Party guy, and he won.
The soothing thing for Democrats will be, and I think they're right about this, which is that the electorate that turns out in 2015 in Kentucky and other places looks more like the electorate that turns out in 2014 than the one that will turn out in 2016. The demographic advantages the Democrats have in an on-year election do not obtain in this race. Nonetheless, it tells you something that there's some salience to a lot of these anti-Obama and Obamacare arguments that Hillary's going to have to fight against.
There's another more technical insider thing, which is Republicans in the age of Obama have been creamed on mechanics of elections in a lot of ways. And in Kentucky in particular, the Republican Governors Association came in this race late. Some outside groups showed the power of organization, of technology, of figuring out how to spend money the right way in order to win what was an upset based on the polls. And that is something Republicans must have if they're going to compete in 2016. All right, when we come back, we talk about the future of the Republican debates with the man who's found himself now in the middle of things. Ben Ginsberg will join us after this word from our sponsors.
Our guest tonight joins us from our Washington bureau. Ben Ginsberg is a Republican lawyer, strategist, and advisor on everything, but he has a specialty when it comes to debates. He's been with every presidential campaign I can remember for a long, long time, currently unaffiliated. For several days, he's been working closely with all the Republican presidential campaigns that have been unhappy with the way that the GOP's nomination contest debates have been structured. They've drafted some new language for a letter that they're going to be sending to the television networks who are sponsoring those debates in the weeks and months ahead. Ben, talk us through how we went from the letter that you drafted over the weekend to the letter that is about to be sent out by the Republican campaigns. Go.
Well, the whole meeting over the weekend was because the campaigns were not happy with the way the debates had been held. They wanted more transparency. They wanted more accountability. It was a meeting of all the campaigns that was incredibly collegial, actually, and productive. but there were some common gripes. And the letter that went out originally was sort of my summation, not signed off on by any campaign, that kind of dealt with every issue you have ever seen in a debate in about the last 4 cycles. And so, not unsurprisingly, different campaigns had different parts that they wanted in. The central premise of the letter, the meeting, was that the campaigns needed to be involved themselves in negotiating the debates. They're the ones who needed to be able to talk to the media sponsors, and that's what's been accomplished.
Then there's lots of logistics about the size of the green rooms and even about the lengths of the debates. But within the 4 walls of the editorial control of the debates, who the questioners are and what kind of questions they ask, do any of the campaigns want to impinge on that, or do they think that belongs to the news organizations who are the sponsors?
Well, they recognize that the final decision belongs to the news sponsors. But the simple fact of the matter is the debates are a time for candidates to be able to talk about the substance of issues and to give their vision. And if the moderators that the networks choose engage in an awful lot of gotcha questions, then the candidates don't have their time to talk about substance and vision. And so what this arrangement does is make clear that the candidates are not committed to coming to all the subsequently scheduled debates, that they want to hear from the networks about exactly what's going to go into those debates, and they'll make a decision after some negotiations with the people who put on the debates.
So, Ben, this new letter of yours takes out a lot of the requests of ask for the networks to either not ask certain things or to do certain things, not do this or do that, right? That's some of the stuff that's changed since the earlier version of the letter.
Yeah, and that'll be, I think, part of the negotiations. I mean, there are things like raising of hands. There's been a provision in debates, both the general election memorandum of understanding and the primary debates, that sort of requests or even mandates that the news organizations not do hand-raising questions. Why? Because you want the candidates to not look like marionettes and to have to answer superficial questions with yes and no. The questions that might come up are all, I'm sure, legitimate questions, but you have to give a candidate a chance to be able to give his or her position on it and not just ask for sort of a reflexive raising of hand.
Raise your hand if you think the current schedule will go forward as is in the end.
Oh, I think more or less, sure.
Well, you didn't raise your hand. Right. I guess you don't like those questions either. Trump says he's going to negotiate directly. Do you expect all the campaigns to negotiate directly? And if so, is it possible to get agreement on anything with 10 or so competing views?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, that's the way it's been done, for example, in the last 2 cycles, where each of the campaigns would have conversations with the sponsors. There would be a common call, which there wasn't always this year, so that all the campaigns got the same information. The campaigns felt the need to have that earlier in the process.
Right. Ben, hold on 1 second. Sorry to cut you off there.
All right, Ben, hold on 1 sec. Don't go anywhere. We're going to continue this debate about debates when we come back.
We're back with Republican lawyer and strategist Ben Ginsberg, who's been working with the Republican campaigns trying to figure out how to go forward on the debates. Ben, sorry we had to cut you off to go to break. Just as I was saying, you've got Donald Trump saying he's going to negotiate directly. You don't have agreement between the campaigns about format, how many people should be on stage, etc. So with the RNC having now at least a somewhat diminished role, how do you think things will proceed forward with these different agendas and the sponsors and the campaigns?
I think pretty much as they have in past cycles. The reality is that the campaigns themselves directed with the media sponsors in the past. And the candidates with the highest poll numbers usually commanded the most attention of the networks. What we saw in the meeting on Sunday night is that the campaigns agree on a very large number of items that ought to be included in the debate. And the negotiations for the part they disagree with will, I suspect, be resolved in pretty collegial.
Ben, I want to ask you to cast forward a little bit away from the Republican nomination contest and towards next year's general election debates. I know you worked with a group at the Annenberg Center on Communications, University of Pennsylvania, that put forward a bunch of proposals, suggestions, recommendations about how presidential debates in the fall, the actual general election debates, should be different. So talk about what those recommendations are briefly and whether you think there's a chance that those things could actually happen.
Well, the recommendations all go to making the debates a better experience for the voters. There are recommendations that would include a much greater use of social media, in other words, an open feed for everyone to use. There are suggestions about format to be able to make it a better exchange between the candidates. There are suggestions on way to broaden the base of who can be a moderator, so there's more diversity in who the moderators are. And all in all, what it's designed to do is to provide a better viewing experience for more people to get involved in the process.
Do you think
now, as to whether there's a chance of them being adopted, you know, whoever the two candidates are, the two nominees, and maybe a third-party nominee, will be the ones to determine the format that they wish to engage in.
The Commission on Presidential Debates has had kind of a stranglehold on this process for some time. Most of the ideas you listed are things I've heard them talk about. How have they received this set of recommendations?
Oh, I think they've read them, and you know, discussions are ongoing. We're happy to explain and have explained what we mean by them. It would be terrific if they adopted a whole bunch of them.
Are you guys doing work on this, Ben, on an ongoing way, the members of the Annenberg panel, to try to nudge this forward and make it a more viable option, that these debates we see next fall are substantially different from the kind that we're all used to seeing?
Oh, we have occasional conversations with people who would be involved in the process, social media companies who might be able to provide some impact. But no, there are a great set of ideas we hope people will take up in the spring.
Ben, what's your sense of how important both in the nomination period and in the general election debates are? Are insiders talking about them too much, or do you think they're actually as important as all the hubbub would suggest?
Well, I think the substance of the debates can be very important. What is unfortunate about what we've been engaging in, not only in the last 10 minutes, but also for the past week, has been sort of the process of the debates. The reason that the conversation about the process came up is that the process that was in place was taking away from the substance of the debates. And so hopefully this conversation about the details of the green rooms and things like that will fade away. We'll have good debates. We'll know what the rules are well in advance of the debates, so the candidates can concentrate on, in fact, what they say, responding to questions, putting forward their vision, and not worrying about the debate going 3 hours without air conditioning.
Ben Ginsberg, we look forward to staying in touch with you about this. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think that the whole thing is going to degenerate into a free-for-all. But I do think we'll probably end up having the debates that are. We'll have the debates that are scheduled. But exactly what's going to happen in terms of the formats, and some of these campaigns really think that liberal bias is the problem, and some of them are going to press that case pretty hard.
Interesting to see if it still stays 10 people on stage. All right, when we come back, my conversation about the Republican field with one James Carville. What's going on after this?
What's going on? You're in the media. You tell me.
The oldest rule in political journalism: when you run into James Carville, you grab him for an interview. Lucky for me, I found myself yesterday face-to-face with the Ragin' Cajun at the Lowe's Regency Hotel on Park Avenue, a few blocks from here, yesterday. And I had my iPhone with me, so James and I had a chat on camera about, first, what he thinks is going on with Jeb Bush.
I used to say that it was a little bit like a vet trying to get a pill down a dog, you know, kind of massaging the throat. I'm not even sure that they're open to voting for Jeb. I mean, he's got to get the dog's mouth open. Every time you hear of a focus group, they just don't want to hear from him. So I'm not sure they're even listening to him right now. He's frustrated, like anybody would be. I mean, his language, I mean, he says he's frustrated. He's not really trying to hide it. And thinks he feels like he's kind of schooled in policy. He's thought about this, and he can't believe that, you know, Chauncey Gardner and Trump and all these people are running ahead of him. It doesn't make sense. He grew up in a very orderly political party that had a very orderly process, and it's all turned upside down now. And he, like a guy is like, is this really happening to me?
I think James kind of has that one nailed. And of course, his wife, Mary Madeline, has been long associated with the Bush family. And I think he's got insight into just how the world is turned upside down, not just for Jeb and the Bush family, but for the whole establishment.
Right, no doubt about that. He's got, you know, he's one of the rare Democrats who has some Bushology, a minor in Bushology, if not a major. Also interesting, I thought, just to hear him feel like a little sympathy. Like, you know, James is normally like, you know, howling and raging, as he does. Just, he sounded almost sympathetic to Jeb. He's kind of like, you know, God, I feel for the guy. Like, he doesn't know what's going on around him.
He spent time on the road with Jeb. They give speeches together sometimes over the last couple of years. And I think that sympathy thing is key. Jeb is, for James, not an abstraction. He's a flesh and blood human being with a lot of strengths. I think it illustrates part of what Jeb's problem is, which is just too many people don't know him. Too many people only think of him as another Bush and don't understand him as a person. All right. Then there's Marco Rubio. I asked James Carville if he thought the candidate everybody's currently buzzing about is really worth all the buzz.
He is the only hope that they have that they don't get 45% under. And they know he's there. Yes, he's the only.
He's the only Republican candidate who could get more than 45% of the vote.
Yes.
Not John Kasich, not Chris.
Well, but they have a chance to be the nominee. Yeah, I mean, John Kasich could get more than 45, but that's like saying I could get more than 45.
So the only rational thing for the Republican Party at this point is to nominate Marco Rubio?
That's it.
And what are his strengths that the others lack?
Because he hadn't said as many things as they have. He doesn't have the same negatives that they do. Look, I don't think he can. I think he can get 47. I don't think he'll win, but he could get over 45.
Right. And you rule out, therefore, any Republican winning a general election except for Marco Rubio. Everybody, unless other people who
unless Romney got into something.
It's funny you mentioned Romney, because in elite political circles, which is where James often travels, there's a lot of talk of Romney. On Rubio, you know, James taps into what elite Republicans are saying now, which is Rubio has flaws. Rubio may not be perfect, but Rubio seems to be the one who can win a general election.
Maybe the only one. Yeah. You know, James, we had Stan Greenberg on yesterday, and Stan's view was the same as James's. I saw James in L.A. a few weeks ago, and James is basically saying, these elections are all serious. Both parties have a lot at stake. Republicans have a lot more at stake, because he shares Stan's assessment that if the party loses, it's in one of those periods right now where it could break up into little pieces, because it's in a state of crisis. Yep. If it doesn't win this election, it could be real trouble.
Yep. All right. And of course, after a while, the conversation inevitably turned to Sir Donald Trump. I asked Carville what surprises him most about the Trump phenomenon.
The Republican Party, the way that they pick their presidential candidates, has been since 1944 the single most predictable event in any democracy anywhere in the world. And this is anything but predictable. I mean, anybody that's like studied Republican presidential politics, this is almost a jaw-dropping event in their history.
If I gave you $30 million and said, stop Trump, what would you spend it on? From winning the nomination?
You know, he's not. You just wait on gravity with him. That's about all you can do, because it's, well, he voted for a Democrat, he has this position. I would just go to the conservative base and just relentlessly go after him from everywhere you could, from talk radio to the Wall Street Journal editorial page to Fox to anything I could, and I'll just relentlessly stay on it. And he's not susceptible to being knocked out with a single bullet.
Again, James, I think reflecting the view of a lot of elites, which is at this point you can pound on Trump, but you're just going to have to wait for it to happen eventually.
I mean, when James Carville, as smart as he is, as aggressive as he is, as unafraid of like trashing someone as he is, when he says all you can do with Trump is wait for gravity, I mean, that's a very passive response, and one that reflects a widespread befuddlement at the problem, the conundrum that is Donald J. Trump. Our thanks to that man, James Carville. Coming up, our conversation with David Holbrook, son of Richard Holbrook, about the brand new HBO documentary about his father, the ambassador, giant of American diplomacy. And we'll be back in 60 seconds with that. This week, the new documentary, The Diplomat, debuted on HBO. The film shows both an unseen view of American foreign policy as well as the legacy of Ambassador Richard Holbrook. What makes this film unique is that it was written and directed by Holbrook's oldest son, David. Recently, David Holbrook stopped by our studio to talk about why he made the film and what his father taught him even after he passed away. The most obvious question in the world, your dad was your dad.
Yeah.
Also a guy who had a huge public profile.
Sure.
In the course of doing this movie, what did you learn about your dad that you didn't know before you undertook this task?
Well, I think I learned something about myself as well, that you can't do it all. You know, you try and be a great diplomat, try and be a father, try and be a husband. Something had to give. And I think also for me it was understanding how impossibly hard diplomacy is. You know, I really understood. I read the articles, I read his book, but when we really got into it, you realize the 360-degree complications that are coming at you when you try and broker a deal anywhere. It's impossible.
But were there things you learned about him that you didn't know that you were like surprised by?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was how persistent he was. He just wasn't going to give up. And I knew that to a point, but it's, again, broad strokes versus details, and that's when it got really exciting, when you really start looking under the hood. Hey, that's a good-looking car, but when you looked under and saw how it worked, it was remarkable. And I think the pressures on him, both in front of him, let's just say in Afghanistan, Pakistan, intractable countries to deal with, but then he had this monster problem behind him, which was really the people he was working for, and that was impossible.
We joked before about how your dad was always called larger than life, even though he wasn't as tall as you are. I'm fascinated by people who are larger than life and what factors contribute to them being termed that by everybody, because in his case, everybody. So what emanated from him? What was it, personality or drive, or what was it that caused people to say
the personality, drive, ambition, talent, and sort of a certain outrageousness. You know, we have a great line from Joe Klein saying, people were saying in 1974 when he met him, did you see what Holbrook said? Did you see what Holbrook did? And I said to Joe, he was 33 years old then. How could he have done anything like that? And Joe says, well, that's a good question, but he had size. And it wasn't just physical size. I got physical size and I have my own presence, but it was this thing that he walked into a room and he was going to be paid attention to. And I think he had a certain intuition with people to understand the dynamic of a room, whether it was a room where peace was going to be negotiated or a book party. Where was the power? He was going to gravitate towards it, and quickly.
Let's play a little clip from the movie, and then we'll talk about it coming out.
I remember at one point Milosevic was worried whether Dick, had the right fortitude, and he came up to him and in this heavily accented English, he said, "Question is, Richard Charles Albert Holbrook, do you have balls to finish this deal?"
He said that to my father.
Yes. And I was standing there, and I looked over at Dick, and Dick didn't answer, but boy, did he take it on board.
So,
sorry to say balls on HBO and Bloomberg. I'm glad about that.
That's right. Well, I'm going to say it again in a second. Look, that was to talk about the Dayton Accords, and the Dayton Accords were a huge accomplishment of your father's, bringing the end to the Bosnian War. I've never heard anybody ever before question whether your dad had sufficient balls for anything. Right. But there are a lot of questions about whether he had sufficient tact. So both of those are necessary for a diplomat. How did your dad balance those two requirements, toughness on one side and tact on the other?
He had a sense of what was going to work, but it was tricky at that particular point when Milosevic calls him on that. Milosevic himself is worried whether my father's going to see this through. Tough point in the negotiation, and give the Clinton administration a lot of credit for going into something and not knowing how it's going to turn out, the year before an election. And so he just had to figure that out. We considered calling the film undiplomatic because that's what he was. He wasn't your typical diplomat in a variety of ways, but ultimately that's what he wanted to do, and I think that sense of intelligence, vision, and also being able to look far down the line but knowing how to get there, the idea to have a vision and be able to execute was very unusual.
He was brought into the Obama administration, worked with Secretary Clinton, and I think it's fair to say had a better relationship with her than he did with the White House.
Certainly.
How did he feel about that? Did he give up on trying to win the president and the White House over, or and just handle the Clinton account, or was he struggling till the end to get the president to focus?
Till the very end, Mark. The day he collapsed, he had his first meeting was with David Axelrod in the White House, and he was going in to say, I need 15 minutes with the president. I've got a vision to get us out of Afghanistan. Let me get in there. And I know that, as he said to his friend Les Gelb, that didn't go well. And so he was desperate to try and fix this. And he knew he had a problem with the president, but he wasn't going to give up. And it's something I really admire about him. In a way, I wish he had earlier and said, hey, this isn't working out. I'm going to take an easier exit out of this, and perhaps he'd still be alive. But that wasn't his nature. He always believed till the end he could make it work.
You're an experienced and great documentary filmmaker. This is not the first film you've made. How does this film differ from one that, if it wasn't made by Richard Holbrook's son?
I'm not objective. Not for a second. I'm his son. However, I have access to people that other people wouldn't have gotten. And I think that emotional journey, the personal part of it, I get these after screenings a lot. You balance the personal and the political so well, the historical and the emotional. And I think one of the lessons I've taken away, and you guys are busy guys, you got families, it's tricky to balance it all, and I think that idea of understanding that other part of a public figure is really important. And the other thing, I think, people who talk to me, particularly Hillary Clinton, you just don't see a side of her like that, because she liked him. She was talking to his son. My son came to the interview. There's a warmth. There's a different side of her, and I think that happened time and again. I think there were other people who might hold back because I was his son. There might be a different frankness, but in the end, I always wanted to make my story of his life. And what I always told our team in the edit room was, this has to be loving, but it has to be honest. And a lot of people said it's kind of a warts and all picture. He was a complicated man, he was a complicated father, but I really felt that I could tell a more 360-degree version of his story than anybody else.
The Diplomat debuted this week on HBO. It's on HBO 2 again tonight, and of course you can catch it on demand or on HBO Go pretty much any time. Our thanks to David Holbrook. We'll be right back with your 24-hour campaign forecast after this.
Tomorrow's another busy day out there in election land, so let's go live to our 24-hour campaign forecast center, where our chief political meteorologist, Alexander Trowbridge, is standing by. Alex, do we have a pleasant day coming up tomorrow?
Mark, I'm sure of it. New Hampshire, that is. 'Tis the season, and we're tracking a lot of activity rumbling across the Granite State. Fiorina, Rubio, and Sanders all getting their names on the ballot tomorrow. Easy breezy. Pay the $1,000, sign the forms, bada bing, bada boom, except for maybe Sanders, the independent, now transitioning to the Democratic ballot. We're bracing for potential ballot headwinds. Jeb, also lingering in the area too, touching down at a senior center in North Conway before moving over to a medical business in Somersworth. Taking our high-def radar coast to coast, it reveals a rare fundraising convergence in L.A. Clinton mixing with Christina Aguilera tonight, then tomorrow it's shaping up to be a Rob Reiner, I'll have what she's having classic. Clinton also slated to make an appearance on Kimmel. No advisories just yet, but we are going to be monitoring the pool reports closely. That's it for me. And remember, like an umbrella or Sasha Eisenberg on an Excel spreadsheet, we have got you covered. Back to you.
Thanks, Alex. So, John, some past Democratic...
That guy's a weirdo.
Good.
I like him. But he's
a meteorologist. Some past Democratic presidential candidates have been kind of skittish about associating with Hollywood celebrities. Hillary Clinton seems to be embracing them.
Well, you think about what happened to her back in 2008, where the Clintons, who were beloved by Hollywood, got spurned for Barack Obama. I think she's so happy to be back in the warm embrace of her old friends.
It's just so funny, because I remember when John Kerry was the nominee not that long ago, and he did some Hollywood stuff. The Republicans pounded him, saying Hollywood liberal elite. Those days seem to be at least on hold.
There's a lot of dough out there. She needs that dough.
So second straight day, we're going to have Rubio and Bush both in New Hampshire. Rubio today picked up a third straight Senate endorsement, one every day for the last 3 days from his fellow senators. What do you think Jeb Bush needs to do when they're both on the ground there?
Well, look, I mean, Jeb Bush has got to stop giving sound bites like the one that he gave to John Carl today. To me, it's very hard for Bush to change the dynamic here because of the fact that there are so many Bush supporters of those that do exist who don't want him to go negative on Rubio. So everybody else is going negative. I think Jeb's got to try to find his stride and let other people do the dirty work.
His campaign manager was asked on a call with donors today, made that suggestion, saying don't go after other people, just talk about yourself. And he suggested that in the debate, which is the next big moment for Jeb, he's going to focus on talking about America's economy, not about his rivals.
All right, we're on the tube for an hour, twice a day at 5 and at 8, but we are live 24/7 on BloombergPolitics.com.
Tomorrow we'll have the journalist, biographer, historian, and Bloomberg View contributor Sam Tannenhouse here to talk about his upcoming piece about Hillary Clinton's Nixonian roots.
Ooh.
You're going to want to see that.
Nixonian roots.
Until then, until tomorrow, thanks for watching. We'll see you. Sayonara.